All right, we're live. Hello, everybody. We're going to give it a couple of minutes before we get started, just for the audience to gather. But thank you for joining us, and we'll start in a couple of minutes.
Yeah. So as I was saying before, like for many of the teams, it's really just multilingual, and then somebody drops in that only knows English, and they either forget to switch over, or it's like they do it anyway. Yeah, it's a thing sometimes. It helps if you know a tiny bit of the language for the group you're dropping into. Just like maybe you can prompt them to switch over.
Yeah,
that's nice.
Yeah, here too. Basically, we all use English by default. Just sometimes you get to speak like the local language too.
Yeah, it's funny actually. If you start a meeting, for instance, with a bunch of people, you default to English, and then all of a sudden people drop out. And after a few minutes, you realize that like you're all natively speaking some other language, and you just keep going in English until somebody's like, "Wait, why are we doing this?"
Yes.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah. That happens. Totally.
Awesome. So we're 2 minutes in. Why don't we kick off the content? So hi, everybody. We're really excited that you've joined us for this webinar on how legal engineering teams can effectively collaborate around open source license compliance. My name's Kevin Wang. I'm the CEO here at FOSSA. I'll be your host today. And I'm super thrilled to be joined by two of our customers. So Nexthink Senior Legal Counsel, Begonia Sanchez de Leon, and Collibra Software Engineer, Niels Doucet. So as we begin, let's start with some housekeeping points. So first, please post any questions that you have in the questions section of your BrightTalk webinar console. We'll be fielding questions as we're going through the content today, talking through a couple of topics, but we'll also have a dedicated time at the end of this webinar for Q&A. So these questions are super helpful and important. Next, this webinar will be recorded and sent out after the event. And so, feel free to follow along, but you'll also have a recording afterwards that you can refer back to. And then finally, we here at FOSSA will be following up with you after the webinar with a few additional resources just relevant to this content, and see if there's anything we can do to help your organization. Awesome. So let's get started. Let's take a look at today's agenda. So we're going to start with a couple of introductions just about FOSSA and our co-presenters. Then we'll get into the content for today, which will cover 4 just really, really big topics around a legal and engineering collaboration with compliance. We will start with talking about why legal and engineering collaboration matters and what's driven us to start these programs at our different companies. We'll get into also legal goals versus engineering goals and the differences and shared overlap between those two groups. We will cover roadblocks to effective collaboration and common challenges that we see in these programs. And then finally, we'll wrap up with just recommendations for effective collaboration between tooling, process, and education. Awesome. So starting with introductions, first for FOSSA. So FOSSA is an open source management company. For those of you that don't know, we provide technology that helps a variety of organizations manage the developers' use of open source and third-party code. One area we really specialize in is driving compliance with open source software and third-party licenses, which will be a big part of our topic for today. And a couple of those use cases include automating the implementation of compliance policies, doing comprehensive license attributions and software bill materials reporting, and also quality and vulnerability management solutions around open source. So that's FOSSA, and I want to hand it off to Niels for a quick introduction. Niels?
Thank you, Kevin. Excited to be here to talk about a topic that's near to my heart. So just a brief introduction to myself. I'm a backend engineer, started at Collibra 8 years ago now, back in 2016, when the world was quite a different place. And over the years, I've wore quite many hats at the company. I started as a backend engineer, moved on to tech lead, product owner, a stint of system architecture, after which I rejoined engineering in the place I'm passionate about, joining the CI/CD team and trying to build out a developer productivity engineering function, where we try to reduce friction in all parts of the software development lifecycle, both on the processes side and the tooling side, which is where I came into contact with legal compliance, and which is why I'm here today. So thank you for having me.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Niels, for being here. And Begonia.
Yeah. Well, hello, everyone. I'm also very happy to be here. I'm looking forward to engage in conversation about this topic. We have had already very interesting discussions on how the open source compliance can go. And yeah, basically a couple of things on myself. I am a senior legal counsel specialized in the IT sector. I've been working in different companies from the IT sector, like the ones described there, HP, DXC, HP Enterprise, and previously in law firms, tackling different issues regarding the field. And lately, well, for a year and a half now, I'm in Nexthink. I don't know, just a couple of words. It's basically the leader company on digital employee experience. So basically a software solution to identify different issues or opportunities in the IT of the company to delight people at work. And I think the open source topic is close to our heart because basically we're an open source solution. We are a software solution that, of course, relies on open source in a number of ways. So, yeah, happy to be here.
Awesome. Thanks for being here. Of course, we all use lots of open source. All right. So with introductions out of the way, let's jump just to our first big topic. So we'll start by talking about why compliance collaboration matters, and what brought us here to addressing these issues inside of our companies. Modern applications are really complex. They use tons of open source, and when legal and engineering teams aren't aligned, the day-to-day operations of doing compliance work can get very difficult. So why don't we just start off by talking about some motivations? Why does compliance matter? Why does collaboration between legal and engineering matter? Niels, you want to get started?
Yeah, so clearly from an engineering side, we use a lot of libraries, many open source, but the knowledge about licensing implications while using those tools, but be it libraries or other tools, that's not something that's top of mind for many of the engineers. So even though we use these tools and we hope it works out, that's not really a strategy. So it's very important to have this contact with legal, just to get context and understand, if you start using a library, whether it's appropriate or not. So having that accessible for this feedback is very valuable.
Yeah, just a note on this. Even though compliance sounds like legal being the police in this topic, the reality is that we understand that open source is great. It's something you don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of things already out there that work pretty well for your solution that you can use. You just need to understand, how to use it in a compliant way to make it work, for both ends, for engineering and then for legal. So for the company at the end of the day. So yeah, basically, I think it's key that we collaborate, because I think we need each other. Legal needs engineering to understand the open source, where it is placed, for what is going to be used, and the engineers need to understand legal. Legal needs to make it easy for engineers to understand some of the licensing implications, how it works, whether it's more risky for the company or aligned with the strategy of the company to use this or that library. So yeah, I think we need each other at the end of the day, and it's great that we are discussing this together today.
Yeah, adding to that, especially legal tends to have very specific language. It's not a vocabulary that engineers really understand, unless they get a lot of background and context from the legal team, just to explain what is actually being said.
Absolutely, yeah. And we need to speak the language in an easy way to make it accessible for everyone and transparent, because otherwise there would be a lack of engagement. If we are just speaking in the legal way, totally far from the engineering side, we're not making ourselves understandable. And if people don't understand the why, they would not get engaged and make the effort to try to get involved and make this happen. So yeah, totally, it's something that we have to work on together.
And something I'm curious about, I'd love to hear when these started becoming, this initiative started becoming important for you. Was there some point in the life cycle of the company's growth or journey where compliance and getting the legal and engineering teams to collaborate became, sort of a must-have or really relevant? Was it just something that's built over time and, finally somebody decided, hey, we really need to address this? What was the sort of moment for when it became a priority to handle this program?
If you want, I can go. Our company was growing more and more. Like first we had a manual process, and that was becoming difficult to manage. Like we would delay the process for engineering would be frustrated because it would take some time for us to reach out to them to understand where the library was packed, how it was going to be used. And then we had to document that after understanding the license that we'll apply. So at the end of the day, for us, it was not only the workload for legal, which was big on top of anything you have to do, but also to make engineering and lives easier in the sense of not delaying the process, not having to come back to engineering and say, oh, you need to change this when things have already been, built. And I think at that point we understood we need something to make this more efficient, to change this, to be compliant. Also because of some of the goals that we will be seeing later, but customer requests, compliance purposes, like they all requested that we were doing this basically.
Yeah, and from Collibra's side, so we're in the data governance space. Many of our customers are highly regulated in the finance industry, for instance, or we have FedRAMP clients in the US. There's also a bit more of a push to have reports readily available for those highly regulated customers. And so streamlining that process is really what kicked off our goal to get into the setting up this process and making it more standardized. Otherwise, you have to engage legal on an ad hoc basis, and it's not very convenient.
Yeah, totally. We sort of just see this topic as increasingly important. Customers and regulation are driving reporting and data provision standards for software attributions and bill of materials reports. We're seeing it a lot in regulated industries like medical devices, payments, financials, or government. And, it always becomes an issue also during super important events with a customer, during, an audit due diligence event. And we've seen also collaboration matter a lot more just because software development continually gets more complex, especially as companies grow, development processes get fragmented, open source usage continues to grow. So, this is a critical topic. And so I think, something I would love to talk more about is, beyond just, why this matters and why this is relevant today is just what the different goals look like for open source management and compliance. And I think, these are two different teams, legal and engineering. I think there are differences between goals on each of them, but there's also a shared vision of where everybody wants to go. So maybe we just start by, talk about some of those. Begonia, do you want to start with this one?
Sure. Yeah. It basically, you mentioned it before, like compliance is like one of the main goals of legal, like having everything, right and in place within the company. It's a basic, but then we're also facing a lot of requests regarding the not only private customers, but also like a regulatory request and more pressure on that side to produce software or bill materials to show how we are compliant with all this. And that also is something that we have to take into account within the legal team, but we have to manage. All that together with, of course, one of the other big things for legal, which is managing risk. And in this case, there's also a risk when you are developing a software that it's basically the core of your business. You have to be careful on what goes in there and what is the risk that you're assuming in terms of intellectual property. So that together with that comment that I was making before regarding reducing engineering pain and the workload, I think is part of the motivation on having something in place like that really makes this easier for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think then from the engineering side, it's really important just to make legal compliance easy to get it right. As in, an engineer should care about this, but they shouldn't have to worry about it at all, in my opinion. So if you have this process in place, it's something that an engineer should consider whenever they try to pull in a new library, but they shouldn't have to worry that they need to seek somebody out to greenlight this for them. It's in the process that it will work for them. So having this feedback easy and early is one of the main goals here. And then that's facilitated by having great integrations, convenient integrations in your development cycle, having issue management in place, making sure your artifacts are scanned automatically without friction and overhead, just like Begonia is saying there, that legal doesn't have to interfere or doesn't have to stand in between an engineer and pushing code to customers. That's the goal.
Mm-hmm. And something I see is pretty notable is that there's some pretty technical and detailed thought that lies in both sides of this coin. Down to treatment of how certain licenses interact, what policies should look like, which license obligations may impact different applications that are distributed differently. On the legal side, to the engineering side of how to really operate around this problem, how to scan release artifacts, integrate with continuous integration tooling, figuring out how builds are composed together to end up in end products, and then how the process should be designed around that. And so given these are two very deep domains on their own and technical, yet they kind of have to come together and work together, I guess, how have you seen ownership around these topics develop in your programs and where they ended up going?
Do you want to go first, Niels, or?
So from the challenges side, it's building bridges with legal is not easy, in the sense that this compliance issue comes from them mostly because it's mostly misunderstood by engineers. So they need to find an in with engineering. Not every company has the silos talking to each other. That's a first hurdle. Once you get them talking, they need to understand each other. And so then once you get the process rolling, you also need to make sure that this process is very frictionless, as I said before, because it's very frustrating for an engineer, just like Begonia already said as well. Like you're playing around with a new library, you're building this great solution that you think is gonna revolutionize your product, and then all of a sudden the red flag gets waved in your face, and legal says, no, you can't do this. Please back out of it because this license is really not working for us, right? From the other perspective, like an engineer might want to do the right thing, and they want to understand first whether they're pulling something in, whether that's actually a good tool to use. Then if you don't have the bridge with legal, how does that engineer get the feedback? It can be a very time-consuming process, because legal has other things to do as well, of course. So you can't just stop the world and tell them, please just fix my question first. And then if you have the process in place, you also as an engineer need to understand which policy applies, because your tool might not go out to customers. It might be an internal tool. So you might have completely different policies applying to whatever you're using. Understanding all of that is a complex matter to navigate. So there's definitely big challenges here to overcome.
Yeah. Go ahead, Begonia. Were you going to say something?
Yeah. Can I just add one more point?
Oh, please.
Yeah. Sorry. There's a third part where you had this library that you were using and it was all fine and dandy, but all of a sudden the people pushing the library out decide to change the license from underneath you. Then what happens? Like that's a bigger problem, because you might be liable without even knowing about it. So having a process in place that automatically scans that for you and keeps you up to date on compliance with the policies is also very important.
Yeah. I guess I mostly agree with Neil's position here. I would add that from legal perspective, it's true that we need to make things easy to understand, to set up a clear process for the engineering team, because if there's no much clarity, like they won't get engaged. Like, when do I have to do this? How do I have to do this? This is just on my way kind of thing. You are adding, like, steps and processes which in general engineers don't like having too many of those that would delay the thing to get into production. Like, they would rather get it right away out there. So yeah, I guess that is also part of it. I also see that even though we do an effort on training, there could always be more training, because I mean, it's true we speak different languages. These compliance requests can come from legal, but I think that there's a way to empower people understanding what is the reason why this is important, like why the company matters about this. And when they understand, they are much more likely to be engaged and to collaborate when they know the why, basically. And for that, I think that the training is key, like having workshops, speaking with people, and doing that on a regular basis kind of thing, because people keep changing. Like, companies, like engineers come and go, new people are joining and they miss the last training. So you kind of need to refreshing that so that they are engaged in the process. And as Niels was mentioning, like, not just because they maybe add a library at the last stage of the process, but even maybe some of them don't even get to know that there's a process to actually seek approval. And when we realized, okay, some of these people maybe did use some licenses which were not properly assessed, we also thought, we need to manage this risk. We need to make it easier, and and develop a number of things to try to make this work.
Yeah, a good shared goal or vision that we usually like putting on the board, when we think about a really successful program, is just, full coverage and a lot of automation. And, I feel like the levers we've typically referenced are first really the policy. The scale of open source usage is really huge. Developers are shipping code continuously that have license obligations. And so, we like to kind of think about this goal of just this expectation that the majority of those policy decisions are all automated. There's tooling covering things, and if there are exceptions, you can escalate them. But tooling and policy choice are sort of key to ensuring that there's this level of automation there. And then also, on top of it, just all of the different artifacts, reports, compliance documentation, fully automated, available at every release. A lot of our customers like integrating those artifacts into the, actual product itself. So a screen on a mobile app that has compliance documentation or somewhere on the website. And one way that we kind of see teams accomplish this is by setting really clear ownership of where different parts of these responsibilities lie. So we usually see, line of business teams like legal be sort of like policy setters and verifiers. They don't get into the details of the tooling and how things are operating, but they set and collaborate with engineering largely on the policy, the why, the goals, which licenses should be treated in certain ways, and then get involved as an escalation point, either when issues pop up or just verifying that the policy is getting complied with. And then the engineering team ends up being this kind of operator, owning the tooling, deciding how these policy decisions impact the developer workflow, whether builds are blocked here for this release or something else, and then just providing these artifacts for, to verify and prove it's legal that the policy is getting followed. So this, kind of division of labor between the policy setter and verifier and the operator is something that we've seen before.
Yeah, I'd like to pick up on that, because that's a big friction that we had at the beginning when adopting FOSSA. So as I said, the impulse at Collibra came from legal, and they were struggling hard to make a connection with engineering to get this tool onboarded. If there's one thing that engineering most of the times doesn't really like, is getting forced into a tool. So getting engineering involved early in this selection process, procurement process, is also very important. They can already start discovering the tool before it lands in the company, and they can already start thinking about how to integrate into it. So, like from my perspective, that's something we should have probably done better. But I'm happy that it finally landed, like with me at that point. But we got a process in place now, and we managed to get our reports out at a regular cadence, which is awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I was gonna also add regarding that thing about finding that correct bridge between the two teams, kind of thing. That for us, in our company, we have an engineering productivity team, which is managing a number of things, and among others, like first they want to make the developer experience and engineering teams like more productive, have their experience be like, smooth, easy, get rid of things that are not adding value on their end, kind of thing. So they were engaged when we were bringing up the possibility of getting a tool in this regard that would make things easier for them, that would remove part of the workload, part of the noise in the process, kind of thing, to advance that assessment that we were mentioning. And to be honest with you, we were lucky because when my boss here, Aisa, started this process, speaking with them and everything, they totally got the point. Like, this is needed. Like, it's more efficient for us, but it's also needed by the company to be compliant, to manage risk. And we found a lot of support on their end. That doesn't mean that we didn't have to, of course, work our way through the management to make this a priority, because of course in a company that is which has a software-based solution, the developers have a ton of things to do every day, and the priorities are changing with different functionalities, different things that come into the tool and stuff. So we needed to make room for it, to make a plan, to scale, like start with something small, try it out, see the efficiencies, inefficiencies, then keep growing until implementation is already there, and we needed to work side by side. So I think that having management on board and a proper, contact person between the teams is a key aspect of it.
Yeah, that's where we lucked out, I guess. Being in the data governance, policy setting, and risk management sphere, like from a business perspective, it's well understood that compliance is quite important. So that management buy-in was probably the easy part.
Yeah, because they have to make it work with a number of things and projects that they have on board. So for that also, what we suggested and was useful on our end was to take care of part of the workload of the implementation, like easy things to work on the tool, easy like meetings to get engineers, different engineering teams on board, the training, the policy, the startup guide, like things that maybe were not so legal, like thing, how to integrate the tool, how to set up the release groups in the tool, these kind of things that were easy for us. We decided to take them on so that we would be relieving the engineering team from maybe administrative part of it, which we were happy to assume. So we found like a compromise, like, we are helping you this way, we need you to help us, make this work too. And I think that was also valued by the engineering productivity team, because they saw we were really engaged. We were not just like, we pick this tool, we will configure the policies and up to you to manage. But we actually are engaged in managing the tool, in, reviewing the code, like setting the policies, everything.
Yeah, a common theme we really see is just this idea of like shared ownership and shared buy-in. And we also definitely see it sometimes takes like a progressive approach to really get there. You start with something smaller, you prove it out, you kind of continue to grow as people start seeing more of the value. And so, I think like this getting to full coverage on automation, I think is certainly a challenge for a lot of companies. I think dual buy-in is a really, really big bridge to be able to, get us closer. And I think a big part of this also just tooling choice, fit with workflow and automation goals to get to these really reliable operations of scanning that works with results we're happy with, remediations that are actively happening and reporting being really efficient. And so maybe this is a good time just to talk a bit about tooling. And, I can kick us off with just, some perspective from FOSSA of what we typically see work here. And so, when we think about the goals of a sustainable compliance program, I think first big thing is just like full developer rollout and adoption, just this coverage topic. And we've talked a bit about this, but I think developer experience is super important, and getting developers involved early on is super important. I think picking tooling that fits with developers and development in the development process well is really big. We'd recommend, bringing in developers early on to the selection procurement of the tooling and setting an expectation of mutual ownership. So, your team's going to be using this too and getting involved. And so it should work really well for you. We got to test what the vendors are saying, because vendors will often make claims about developer, friendliness that might not actually end up being true when truly tested, and just a full support for the development environment languages. I think another recommendation that we have around this is also like tools that allow you to manage the gradient of risk at different parts of the development lifecycle. So not all risks, especially related to licenses, require the same level of scanning and review and developer integration. Some risks are best to manage early on in the development process. Some risks are best to be managed right before release. And so having tooling that can kind of have these multiple checkpoints, and FOSSA, our version of this is called, release groups, but, where you can kind of do the management early on in the process in the developer journey to, right before the release is another key feature. Other big, comment we typically think through is just sort of like tooling choice that fits with like the workflow and automation goals. So I think, there's this very nuanced alignment that's required between, legal and engineering teams. The legal stakeholders need views to get visibility, set policies, ensure the standards are correct, and the attributions are correct. And then, the views for engineering developers need to be powerful enough to configure the tooling behavior, prioritize and remediate and escalate issues really quickly. And so the maturity of this like issue remediation workflows where you can actually dig into an issue, see the root causes, fix them, and then also ensuring audit grade standards, meaning, the scanning that's happening inside of the development pipelines by the tools are the same as, the level that would be done during a code audit or one of these big events. I think is really, really crucial. So there's two areas that we usually really focus on when, recommending tooling choices. Any recommendations from you two, Niels, Begonia, on features that stand out that you feel like are very important to a tool being helpful for this process?
Yeah, for engineers, it's very important to have a tie-in in their regular software development lifecycle. Like introduce your compliance in the regular CI pipelines is very convenient for them, because that's the place they already go look at when something goes wrong. Then having the clear feedback in the CI environment about what's going wrong is very important. And then making sure that an engineer can easily jump from that feedback to the actual tool that's providing it, meaning you have an easy traceability from your CI going wrong to FOSSA explaining what actually went wrong, and then back to your code base, because you need to understand which of your tools and code bases is actually introducing this violation, right? So having that full life cycle from the regular workflow of an engineer to the tool that's kind of on the fringes, and then back to where they're comfortable, that's where you need to have frictionless tools in place. And then once they identified what's going wrong, making it convenient for them to easily remediate and make sure they can provide back the feedback to the tool that was flagging the issue, and making sure if they resolve something with the aid of legal, or if it's not necessary by themselves, making sure that that resolution is also convenient and persistent in the tool is also very good to have. And then as an aside, once there, I think we lost Kevin.
Your answer was so good that it kicked me out of the meeting. So I'm back.
Yeah, I was just gonna say as a last point, once they're in the tool in FOSSA itself, having reference information available, because I know, like, if an engineer goes into a tool, they look at something that gets flagged, they want to know more. Why is this happening? What's the context in which this is happening? So having then easily accessible reference information about these licenses, what they mean, what they why they can't be using them is also very convenient, and that reference is definitely also available. Yeah, as an anecdote, I knew about TLDR legal before I knew of FOSSA as a tool. I referenced it before any company ever asked me about legal compliance in library usage. So that's just a great source to have available.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. We use that too, actually. We publicize it among the engineers. We had our own guide, like we already have the guide, but in case like they don't know where the guide is or now they don't find it, blah, 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 we just give them the link so that they can actually check themselves, like what is it with that particular library. And I was just gonna add that for us, it was key that the engineering team liked the tool, like that they, not only that, of course, they validated that this could be integrated with our own thing, but how they would manage the access rights, whether this would cover the use cases that we have, like the back components, the agents, the languages, everything, no? And also, also the fact that they could make it work so that the upload of the libraries and the software that we have is made in an automatic way. So they didn't have to each time upload the content there and then, get the tool scanning the thing, but to make some automation there so that there's less workload for all of the teams. Of course, from legal perspective, setting the policies is key. Like if we are able to determine, okay, these kind of policies are going to apply to these kind of components, that generally eases the process a lot. It makes it faster. And only specific cases come to us, like when it's not clear, when there's an escalation, when maybe there's a misunderstanding, but everything is better organized. And it's funny that it's here in the slides, but totally one of the things that when we were listing the things that we would want in the tool was that it was easy to use, because legal was going to be using it. It was not only like an engineering tool, where we would be stepping out of the thing once it was configured. No, we are actually going into the tool, using it, configuring, doing stuff in the tool. So we definitely wanted it to be like intuitive, easy to use kind of thing. And we are also finding a big help from the customer success team in FOSSA.
Yeah, totally. I think people can forget sometimes that humans have to use software. So usability is super important, and it kind of affects everything else. Yeah. Maybe we can switch gears from tooling and just talk about some best practices and process. So, I know we talked about a couple of these topics earlier on in our discussion. I think the one, big four that always stand out to us are, one, getting engineering on board during the tooling evaluation process and having ownership. I think back to this idea of, policies, having a defined and shared process for addressing issues that surface. And then just the philosophy of making it super easy to, for engineers. And finally, I mean, vendors are here to help, and they've seen this before at a lot of different companies. So, asking tooling vendors is usually a great way to get a process started up from 0 to 1. Any other best practices and just in terms of process that you folks would recommend to the audience?
Do you want to go, or shall I jump?
Yeah, so as you said, like asking the vendor for help, especially with the initial workload of getting all of your code bases onboarded into the tool is important to streamline that. It's also the first experience that you have as a company with the tool you just acquired. So having that go as easy as possible is definitely helpful. And then it's just about leveraging all of the automation tools you have available, right? As an engineer, you kind of despise manual work because all of the manual work is error prone. So as much as possible, automate all the flows and just make it as easy as possible to be in compliance with all your legal policies, which also applies beyond those, of course. But in this context specifically, the consequences can be quite significant. So like, just make it hard to make mistakes or easy to be compliant is what I would say. And then once you have this initial scan ready for all of your code bases, getting from that to steady reporting is also not easy. And this is really where the alignment comes into place. Really connect with legal to make sure you both understand which side is responsible for what part of bringing out those reports to the customers, and making sure you both understand how to resolve issues, how to remediate whenever a violation occurs, and how to escalate all of this. I think that's the most important part.
Yeah. I think we said it before, no? Like the set a clear process, it always like makes it easier to manage, to move, no? Look, I was gonna add also as good practices that helped us was to set up, for example, a Confluence page, which is the main resource for our engineering team to look at, like, you know, the processes, the guidelines, and we set up a startup guide there. We have come up with a policy which is tailored to the actual open source scanning tool. Like, it's not just a generic policy on open source, but it has the generic side, the ownership side, like who takes care of what, who is responsible for what, who is approving what, and then some basic concepts, and that would all go together with some specific training, which we intend to make easy, fun, whenever possible in person, to remain available for people to come over legal and say, okay, let's start, you know, from scratch, because we don't understand this concept. Why is this important? Why are you speaking about this and that, which I don't understand? And also even to work through cases with them, like to understand, okay, if you are using this here, it implies this. If you are using this kind of license, it has these implications. Like, just we are looking for ways to make that happen in a nice and fun way, which is a bit more appealing than the typical training you do while multitasking on something else, hopefully. Mm-hmm. And I think I wanted to highlight also that, for example, the customer success team in FOSSA has helped us think about different ways to make this happen, on how to transfer the knowledge, for example, for people who are new and joining the company, maybe putting some know-how together in the form of a video or offering to do a talk. We haven't done that yet, but they have been super helpful in offering resources and helping us, for example, put together some documentation so that new people using the tool can, you know, catch up with some documentation up there, because maybe they were not here when we implemented it, when we started using it, and what were the principles that guided that. And one of the recommendations, which is a bit, it may seem a bit naive, but I think it's important, is to build up the relationship between legal and engineering. Like, the best is not to work in silos, to be just like, you know, this is my side of it, this is your side of it, but to understand each other, priorities, incentives, ways to work, like not only the language, but to understand, okay, if this is release time, engineering is not going to listen, you know, and it makes sense. If it's end of the quarter and we are reviewing contracts, it's not the right time to try to go in depth into something. To build up the personal relationship, I think, makes things much more fluent. Things work better. Like, everybody's more, I don't know, eager to collaborate and to make things easier for the other side. It can be naive, but I think that in our case, it has worked out super well. Basically, because we had a very good environment from scratch, but that was initiated by my manager and continued. And we enjoy the relationship. Of course, we have frictions from time to time, but I think that it has really make a difference.
Yeah, we really love learning and taking those tactics and strategies that we come up with customers and learn from your team, and then try to cross-pollinate that across other companies that run to similar problems. So how to set up the workflows, create communication channels in tools like Slack between different teams, utilizing existing workflows like Jira or other kind of compliance workflows to just plug into. And so there's tons of tactics inside of here that make this process smoother, and we really love working with our customers and trying to cross-pollinate some of that knowledge.
Yeah, just now that you mentioned the Teams channel and stuff, for example, something that was also super useful for us was to set up a Teams channel with people from FOSSA, with engineering and with legal, so that we could, for example, in the implementation process, and even during the demo, to ask questions, so we were all in the loop. We would all see what the others were advancing on, what was missing, and we were all in the same page, and that was also super useful. It's very administrative, very down to earth recommendation, but for us it worked really well, because emails at the end of the day kind of get lost, people answering one chain, then they don't follow the train of thought. And the Teams channel, even if it's a easy thing to do, it was really helpful, I found too. We would all.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
I agree. We also, during a bunch of the automation processes, there's always questions about how to set things up, and if FOSSA knows a better way to do kind of things. Having that direct communication line in place is really convenient.
Yeah.
Totally. Awesome. There's a question that popped up from the audience from Lisa at Wind River Systems. Perhaps this was asked before, but is there a possibility at FOSSA to craft IP policies with allowed and prohibited licenses per product line? For example, if I'm scanning the LX-based product, I should be able to set up the policy based off of my company's business objectives. However, I'm scanning a proprietary product, I would like to set up a different license policy with a respective set of licenses. Great question. And so, absolutely. I think for us, we have a set of standard policy templates that we have configured for different kinds of, products, like if you're building a website versus shipping a single binary or bundle distribution. But it's super, super common to basically have different policies that are customized for different product lines. And so, inside of FOSSA, we have the ability to create these custom policies. Those are usually tuned depending on the product line that is getting scanned. Different licenses will apply depending on different business conditions, and that's true also for how I think other kinds of risks like vulnerabilities should be handled. Do you guys utilize that feature? Are there examples of how you guys use customized policies?
Yeah, indeed, for us it's key. I meant to explain that before, that maybe it was not clear enough. We actually use that, and it actually streamlines a lot the process, and it makes it easier for us, because we can determine, okay, these kind of components are riskier because X factors, and then we set up this policy, which is maybe more stringent, and then when some other comments are not as risky, we can set up a policy which is not as strict. And that is really you can classify the different components, the projects, the release groups, and apply different policies to each of them. So yeah, that definitely works pretty well for us. And I guess it's part of the attractive of the tool.
Yeah, that's something I was gonna come to in the next topic on the education part. The policy setting is clearly something that legal does, because they understand the legal context and framing here. But legal needs to understand where they apply those policies. So they need to understand all the different deployment models of whatever software is being shipped by a company. They need to understand what the difference is between an on-premise versus a hosted versus an in-house tool. What it means to run inside the cloud, whether that be hosted or self-hosted or run on bare metal machines. then the code itself, where you pull in those libraries, is it being distributed at all? Because it might just be an internal tool which only is used in the company itself, versus it's actually being shipped to customers, right? So then like an internal tool, the deployment model doesn't even matter, because it's not going out anyway. So your legal obligations are completely different again. And then when it comes to commercially licensed tools, understanding the contract you have with those tool vendors is also very important. And that might just have completely different policies applied, whether you ship those commercially licensed tools as OEMs, part of your distributions, or if it's, again, something that you use in-house, but there are certain restrictions based on the contract on how it can be used or who can use it. That's all very important. So having legal understand that part so they can apply the correct policies on each of the things you scan is super important.
And again, that's why we need engineering. We need to collaborate totally, to have the perspective on where to apply those policies. Indeed, I agree with you. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. We almost see it as kind of like, that part of the workflow be part of almost like the release management workflow, because usually there's a very big difference between the list of all the repositories and artifacts that are relevant in development, but then what ends up actually getting packaged into the product line. Sometimes one, repository may be part of multiple product lines, and different rules would apply depending on which product line it runs into. So this idea of release management is a very kind of important part of, I think, the alignment between legal and engineering. We're getting the last 10 minutes of the webinar, and this would be a great time for the audience to add in additional questions. We still, have kind of our final topic to cover, which is just education and training. So why don't we talk a bit about this, and then we can handle any questions that pop up. I think with regards to education, all of us at different organizations start off at a different level of sophistication. And maybe we can go through a bit of the story about, like, where we started at our companies, where we are now, and talk about some of the tactics to level up and understand. And so, I'd love to maybe ask Begonia or Niels on what are some of the tactics you've used to drive education, and maybe where you started and where you are now.
Well, I think I explained a bit of that before regarding like at the beginning. I mean, some time ago we were a smaller company. We have been growing over time, and then the workload has been growing. The need to make this happen in an easier way and faster has also implied that we needed to make, to get a tool to make this work, to be comprehensive, to get the full thing within the scanning, let's say, for open source. And that's the journey when we started to get people involved, management, engineering productivity, that collaboration started, and choosing the tool and all that. But one of the things that I find interesting is that even though people knew about this, and of course they are familiar with the topic, understanding the why, it's key. Like as I was mentioning also before, it gets them to actually collaborate, to be engaged, to understand, okay, this could be something like important. Recently, we had a solution architect join the company, and he was telling us a very good example that actually I am using with the engineering teams now when I need to, evangelize on the topic. It's regarding the fact this guy comes from a company that was to acquire another company. And before doing that, they actually asked to scan the code, because it was basically a software solution that they were acquiring. And they found a number of open source libraries which were not basically aligned with what they were expecting, that could put some risk on the acquisition they were doing. And they delayed the whole acquisition of the company thing until all those issues spotted by the scanning of the code were solved. When we share that here in the company, people understand better, like, okay, so this has real life implications. It's not just a delay or the fact that I have to remediate this later on time, which is painful enough, but it's also the possibility of, in case our company is acquired or, I don't know, goes public or whatever happens next, there's going to be an impact here. And it's not just like a possibility, but it's true. It happens. It's not just something that legal is telling you will happen. It's a real thing coming from an engineer, who has experienced that in another company just like a couple of years ago. So I think that these kind of real world examples, and also, they also see this because many times they are the ones managing the SBOMs and all that. Like, they also see this is important for many and more customers of us, or for regulatory requirements. So yeah, I think like getting down to earth on the topic, it's also helpful for understanding the why it matters.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
A question from Seema in the audience. How to persuade software developers to prioritize open source compliance? How do we do that?
That's a really good question. Like for an engineer, legal compliance, just like security compliance, is a hurdle, a nuisance, something that stands in the way between them bringing a solution to customers, right? So there are just these engineers that care, and there are those that will never care. So you just need to bake it into the process and make it impossible for them to evade it, and also make it as frictionless as possible, because then whenever they encounter an issue, it's not really a problem. They see it early enough that it's not causing them days of delay. They see it in a way that they can easily resolve it. And if they need guidance, the processes are in place to make it as easy as possible to get to where they need to be, which is to push that code to production, right? So if you have all of that in place, there shouldn't be any persuasion. It's just in the process. It is there.
Yeah, indeed. And I guess what we were just saying before, the real life examples, like it's just there. Like, it has an impact whatever you do there. So that could be something to motivate it. And also what we were saying before, thank God we have tools which make things easier with less effort, less workload. So let's make the most out of that. Like,
yeah, totally agree.
Yeah, definitely. Let's try to leverage that benefit that we get with the tooling, which is not the manual process of getting a Word template, filling it in, sending it to legal reviewing, legal getting back to you, asking you, where is this going? How are you going to use this? Blah, blah. Then this is my approval. Oh, wait, I didn't get this right. Blah, blah. So
yeah, avoiding that back and forth is definitely a good way to get in the head of an engineer.
Yeah, I think that was
awesome.
one of the things that we solved when we were trying to get the tool. Like, it's going to make your life better.
Exactly.
Go for it.
All right. On that note, I think that's just a great note to end this webinar. I want to thank you again so much, Niels and Begonia, for joining us for our webinar today and sharing your expertise and experience with the audience. We will be following up with some content from today, and also other resources to help any folks looking up to boot up a compliance program. And I just want to thank everybody for taking time of your day to attend and learn and engage and ask questions. And thank again our panelists for sharing their knowledge and expertise. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you so much. Nice to talk to you again.